was a 17-year-old moody teenager, I had a big argument with my mom one night about how she just didn't understand my needs and stormed out of the house. I was going to go for a walk, but it was freezing outside and really dark. So I did a quick walk of shame past my mom, grabbed my car keys and gave her a quick explanation of going on a McDonald's run before storming out yet again and giving the door a nice slam on my way. I jumped in my terribly old red Suzuki, cranked up the heat, and turned up my angry teen music and pulled out onto the dark streets. I drove to McDonald's in about 10 minutes and decided I was too mad to eat, and to calm down, I would go for a nice drive. Just down the road, another 15 minutes, was a stretch of pitch black windy road that had lots of hairpin corners as it ran down a massive gorge with a small lake and a single lane bridge going across it. If that doesn't sound scary enough, the road was called Galston Gorge. I knew this road very well. As I was making my way down the gorge, I turned a hairpin corner, and as my headlights swung around it, it lit up the road ahead, and I saw a black medium-shaped object in the middle of the road. It made me jump, but I assumed it was just a dead kangaroo. As I got closer to this object, I realized as I was almost on top of it that it was a baby car seat with the front covered in a blanket. I hit my brakes. I sat in my seat, staring at this baby seat, clenching my steering wheel. No way I was getting out when it was probably just a broken and dumped booster seat. I was about to pull off when I heard a noise. I turned my music down. The sound of my car engine made it hard to locate or recognize the noise. I wound my window down an inch and listened. It was a baby crying. No, crying was an understatement. This poor thing was screaming. I threw my seatbelt off and unlocked my door, grabbing the handle. Then I froze. Out of the corner of my eye, in the bush, I thought I saw something move. It was just out of reach from the light of my headlights. I took my hand off the door and slowly sat back into my seat, thinking. I remember my mom telling me never to stop my car at night, that if I see something that requires help, then to move on and call for professional help, because there's no situation that would require the help of a moody teenager. I was thinking all sorts of things. The baby needed help. It was a tiny, defenseless baby. What if that was a wild animal I saw in the trees coming to have a meal out of this little thing? Then I opened my car door, and as I did, my car let out a screech, causing whatever it was in the trees to jump. I slammed my door, jumping back in and sped up down the road. I got a few hairpin turns back up the gorge before I pulled out my phone. I still had no signal, as I was driving in a literal hole. I raced up to the top and back into the busy streets, and then called for the police. I told them what I saw, and they told me to go home immediately, to not stop whatsoever, and to keep my doors locked. They would call me tomorrow, but not to worry. The next morning, the Hornsby police called me, thanking me for my report. They said that a group of men have been placing baby seats in the middle of empty roads, covering them with a blanket which hides a speaker playing the sounds of children in distress, to try and lure young women out of their cars. They then drag these women away and take advantage of them, and then beat them, then driving away in the woman's car and leaving their victim to die in the bushes. They checked out the gorge, but the people had left. And they left in such a rush that they forgot their baby blue blanket with little gray elephants on it, the same one I described to the police as the one covering the baby seat. They said I was clever to keep going, and to never get out of my car late at night, no matter what tries to stop me. Two years ago, when my autistic daughter had trouble sleeping at night, I would toss her in the car seat and drive her around. She was only around 1.5 at the time. It was one of the only ways she would fall asleep soundly, and I lived with my parents in a nice neighborhood. So one night I'm driving, and my girl had finally fallen asleep. It was about 9 p.m. at this point. I was hungry and wanted to let her fall into a deeper sleep so I could move her. I went to get some food from a drive-thru and pull over onto a side street right next to the restaurant so I could eat. As I was finishing eating, I looked back to check on my kid. Then suddenly, these super bright headlights pull up behind me, a little too close. I waved apologetically, assuming whoever it was trying to park at the house I was currently in front of. So I pulled away and started down the street. Once I was at the end of the block and around the corner, I saw headlights again. No big deal. This is a semi-busy side street, so people cut down this way all the time. Only this person was tailgating me, like I wasn't moving fast enough. I got annoyed and changed lanes to get out of their way. But almost as soon as I did, they followed. At this point, I realized that the car was the same sedan that had pulled up behind me on the last street. But now they were way too close for me to see the make of this car, and the high beams were on, so I couldn't see anything behind me. I cursed myself for not paying better attention to the car before. I didn't want to be crazy paranoid, so I took a few unnecessary side streets and passed my neighborhood, only for this person to be behind me for every turn and every lane change. I started panicking and called my dad. I know I should have called the police, but I was only 21 and this was the first thing I thought of. He was at work, 30 minutes away. He had terrible reception and decided to call me back on the landline at his work, and was on the cell phone with the sheriff's department for our neighborhood, and they told me to drive to the station. It's been close to 40 minutes since this person started following me, and they just kept tailgating me closer and closer. I'm running lights and swerving around at this point, just trying to catch someone's attention. So I drive to the station, and no one was there. Not one car. No cruisers, and no one in the department office. They wanted me to pull into the lot and wait for an officer. I was alone, with my 1-year-old now fussing in the back seat, and there was only one way in or out of the parking lot. I noped past the station and told my dad to tell the officer on the phone that I wasn't going in because no one was there. I see a sheriff's car at the light ahead and start to honk and flash my lights as he drives across the intersection I'm driving to, and either misses what I'm doing or ignores it. It's now been a little over an hour, and this person has rear-ended me 4 times. Eventually, I saw another sheriff's car and just laid on my horn. I think he caught on because he busted a U and came back towards us. As he did, the car behind me disappeared into a mall across the street, and the officer followed. I was instructed to go back to the station and wait, so I did. And eventually I was waiting so long that I decided to go inside the station. I triple locked the door of my car because I was so terrified. The office had no one except an emergency phone on the desk. To wrap the story up, they made me feel crazy and said they never found the car, that all they could do was take a statement since technically nothing happened. And he offered to follow me and my daughter home, only to drive away as soon as I parked while I was taking my sleeping kid inside, shaking so hard I couldn't unlock the door. I ran upstairs to my mom's room. I shook her awake sobbing and told her what happened. It took me 2 days to sleep again at night, and to this day, I refuse to do night drives with my daughter. A few years ago, my sister decided to have a surprise 30th birthday party for her husband. Since he missed his senior prom, she decided to make that the theme of the party, and even booked the same hall his prom was hosted in when he was a teenager. Problem is, my brother-in-law grew up in basically the middle of nowhere, a small rural Missouri town that you have to leave the highway and travel down about 5 miles of heavily wooded back roads to get to. On top of being so isolated, there's a rather large heroin problem out there, both using and dealing. It's a pretty potent cocktail, but my sister was determined to have the party there. The party was at 6, and my original plan was to drive out with my sister and her friends to help get it set up, and then drive back home with her. However, I got called into work and had to stay until 4, so I told my sister I would drive up by myself as soon as I was done. She warned me that it was pretty easy to get turned around on those country roads, but I had Google Maps to help me, so I didn't worry about it. The drive up was fine. It was late September, my favorite time of the year, and the scenery was surprisingly pretty. I found the place, no problem, and helped with some last-minute setup until my brother-in-law showed up. The party was a lot of fun and lasted till about 11, when the hall closed. I was one of the last people to leave, having stayed behind to help my sister and her friends stack chairs. We ended up not actually heading out until almost midnight, and by that point, I was exhausted. My sister once again warned me about being careful on the back roads, but I'd gotten up there okay, so I wasn't too concerned about driving home. I hugged her goodbye, hopped into my car, and started working my way back to the highway. Unfortunately, in my sleepy state, I misjudged which road I was supposed to turn off at as I reached the exit for the highway. I ended up turning down an entirely different road that ran parallel to it instead. It was another heavily wooded and narrow back road. I started looking for somewhere I could pull in to turn around. After driving maybe 200 yards, I spotted a gravel embankment and decided to pull in there so I could get turned around. I pulled in and made a sharp U-turn so I could head back up the road, and as I lifted my head to check no one was coming, I saw something in my driver's side mirror. A figure in a dark blue t-shirt and jeans, with long black hair and a pale face, illuminated in my brake lights. My heart jumped into my throat as I gasped in fright. But after a second of pure panic, I realized that the pale face was actually a mask, one of those cheap plastic white ones you get at costume stores. I immediately felt like an idiot. It was almost October, so obviously this was a Halloween decoration. This embankment probably led to someone's driveway, and the family who lived there probably had tons of things like that in their yard. It took a moment to unclench my hands from the steering wheel and let my heart rate get back to normal, but I ended up catching a glimpse of the thing in my mirror again. And I then realized that the embankment didn't lead to a driveway. There was nothing else behind me but tall grass and trees. I briefly wondered why anyone would put a Halloween decoration out in the middle of nowhere. And then, the decoration took a step forward. I slammed on the gas and shot forward, eventually getting back onto the main road and onto the highway. I don't think I stopped shaking until I reached my town's city limits a half an hour later. Looking back, I definitely wasn't in any danger. I was in a car, all the doors were locked, and I could easily have run down whoever that creep was if they tried anything. If they'd gotten even one step closer when panic mode set in, that's probably what I would have done. It was probably just a kid or a local druggie in some crappy mask, giving motorists a good scare and not really thinking about the consequences. But still, it was definitely one of the creepiest moments of my life, and I'm still nervous driving down secluded country roads at night to this day. This video contains 3 true horror stories from people moving into a new house. If you enjoyed this video, watch this one next.